Happy Friday. All right. Welcome to our September Hungry for History program, Josephine Stiles and the West Broad Street Theater District. If you don't know me, I'm Lieutenant Spraker with the City of Savannah's Municipal Archives. And before I forget to tell you, I'd like to ask you to silence your cell phones. I am really excited about today, both for our program, but also because your speaker, Chad Newsom, and I have collaborated to make this a fun opportunity for you guys to share about your theater and movie-going experiences as well. So you'll notice in front of you there is a prompt card, and it asks a few questions about your own experiences. So we encourage you to participate today by sharing your thoughts on this card before you leave. You might have thoughts during the program that you want to jot down, or just after the program, take a few moments. If you prefer, there's a checkbox at the bottom that you can check off that says, make this anonymous. Don't ever share my name when you talk about my memories. And you can leave your finished cards in that pink bag at the table before you leave. And I'd ask you to leave the pens behind too, because that's like basically the department's whole supply at the moment. So after the presentation, we're also going to be manning our History on the Go station with a different set of questions related to theaters and the experience of being in the theater. So you can speak on theater buildings here in Savannah or wherever you grew up. So don't feel like you have to be a native Savannian to answer any of these questions. We're really just trying to touch on what is that movie and theater going experience like. The History on the Go is basically like doing a mini oral history where you answer one question, and you can think of it like a 30-second oral history TikTok video if you're into that. We're going to do those over in the corner after we're done with the presentation and questions. So anybody who wants to stay and have a little fun with us, we're really excited to kind of do that. And we've got like 6 questions for you to choose a question from, or you can do more than one question. Kelly Zakovic and Kelly Westfield from the archives are going to help out with that. And for any of you who are willing to give us more time later and are interested in sitting down for a formal oral history interview about theaters and movies here in Savannah or elsewhere, we would love to schedule a longer oral history with you. And so you can touch base with any of the archive staff to let us know and provide us your contact information. But I know that you guys are all ready for our speaker. So I'm pleased to introduce Chad Newsom. Chad is an art history professor and film historian fascinated by overlooked or forgotten stories of cinema's past. With a PhD in English, an MA in cinema studies, and a BA in philosophy, his work emphasizes cinema history as part of a broader social history where people, places, theaters, and films intersect. For several years, Dr. Newsom's research has focused on local African-American film history, culminating in the book Movietime Down South, which is forthcoming from UGA Press. The book creates a portrait of Jim Crow-era moviegoing using Savannah-based stories of theaters, films, and stars. Chad has also created a walking tour of historic West Broad Street based on this research, which he'll be sharing with us for our December Hungry for History program. So you can stay tuned for that announcement if you're interested in registering. We're waiting for it to be nice and cool and comfortable for our walking tour. We are also collaborating with him on an online sample of this tour that will also allow people to submit their own memories of West Broad Street. And we'll be pushing that out through the city in the 4th quarter. So that's really exciting that he's sharing all this wonderful research with us in such a public way. So lots of exciting stuff coming, and it's starting today with Chad's talk. So I want to welcome him.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
This is research I've been working on for several years, and I'm excited to present you with the latest version of these discoveries. So the title is Josephine Stiles in the West Broad Street Theater District. We're going to begin today at the end with news footage of historic West Broad Street. The brief film shots are filled with life on a bright, warm November day. While a light breeze flows, people stroll down the wide sidewalks wearing the era's fashions, women in dresses, men in hats. Parked vehicles line streets filled with all types of buildings and businesses that we can notice, from a vendor selling melons to a department store, bank, church, restaurants, and a movie theater, the Dunbar. Traffic flows at a gentle pace and doesn't hinder what appears to be a pedestrian-friendly area. It's clear that some people head to work, some are there merely to shop, and no doubt many simply enjoy what looks to be a beautiful and mild fall day. Overall, the footage shows vibrant yet leisurely images of a downtown city scene in 1962 Savannah. In some ways, the film clip rings familiar to present-day viewers knowledgeable of the city, whether a local or a visitor. In other ways, however, the film is hard to place because West Broad, or it is now known Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, looks so radically different today. Many Savannah locales look as they did decades ago. Yet much of what you see in this West Broad footage has been demolished, and today Interstate 16, both its on-ramp and flyover exit, dominates the streetscape in addition to gasoline stations, fast food chains, and cacophonous traffic that moves at dangerous highway-like speeds. For 50 years, West Broad functioned as a separate community within a community for African Americans during the height of the Jim Crow era, when segregation was an everyday fact of Savannah and American life. Throughout these decades, West Broad's businesses, churches, and entertainment venues enabled Black Savannahans to be surrounded by an array of institutions that mark the vibrancy of Black life in the city. When West Broad is spoken of as not merely a street, but a neighborhood, 4 blocks from Jones to Gwinnett are generally emphasized as demarcating a, quote, physical record of the independence and economic importance of African Americans. And on this next slide, there's not one particular thing I want you to see here, and also it's super small. But this is just one page from the 1951 city directory or phone book. This is listing the 400 to 700 blocks. I just wanted to give you a sense of how much was located there. Presently, however, only by an act of imagination could one conjure West Broad in its heyday, from the 1910s to the 1950s. Movie theaters, bars and clubs, restaurants and a hotel, doctors and dentists, groceries and pharmacies, banks and insurance companies, churches and beauty schools. In total, over 200 owned Black-owned businesses on or near this thoroughfare, in addition to many enterprises run by Jewish, Greek, Chinese, Italian, German, or Irish immigrants. West Broad was an axis of one of the oldest and most important African-American communities in the nation and an epicenter of African-American commerce and culture. As I will emphasize today, with my focus on West Broad's theater district, it was a thriving cultural center. Historian Charles Elmore notes that Savannah, quote, that Savannah was one of the hottest entertainment spots on the eastern seaboard. West Broad's theaters screened Hollywood movies and independent race films made for Black audiences. On those theater stages, you'd find not only top local talent, but also celebrated icons of blues, jazz, and early rock and roll. You'd encounter Ma Rainey on stage at the Pekin Theater in one era, and then Little Richard at the Dunbar in another. You might spot Louis Armstrong at his after-hours hangout, or Cab Calloway resting up at a nearby boarding house. Beyond big movies or national acts, however, even just a regular Saturday matinee at the movies was Seventh Heaven, recalls Mercedes Arnold, who grew up near West Broad. For jazz musician Teddy Adams, West Broad was not merely a nucleus for both Black entrepreneurship and Black patronage, but formational for his own artistry. Quote, the environment was and is an indelible part of my life and provided the foundation for surviving as a person and a musician, end quote. The loss of West Broad, therefore, eradicated a significant portion of Savannah's 20th century history because it was more than just buildings and businesses, but a community whose history has been erased as its physical traces were destroyed. From these latter days of West Broad's history that you observed in this film footage, let's now travel back to its beginnings. For generations of Black Savannahans, West Broad was the town's axis, and we can trace its lively cultural scene back to the visionary exploits of one particular entrepreneur, Josephine Stiles and her Pekin Theater. On Thanksgiving Day, 1909, Stiles opened the Pekin at 625 West Broad Street as a small-time vaudeville theater, which means it combined live performance and film. By 1912-1913, not only did movies become the theater's primary attraction, but also their popularity prompted the building of a new Pekin Theater to accommodate the flicker frenzy. As we will see, the success of this one theater will have a ripple effect on West Broad's history, and her influence will swiftly expand. Stiles Pekin laid the cornerstone that not only built Savannah's African American theater district, but also made West Broad an entertainment hub more broadly for half a century. So to understand what Stiles accomplished, it'll help to know a little bit about early movie theater history. Only 3 weeks in 1896 separate the official debut of projected movies in the United States from the Supreme Court decision, Plessy versus Ferguson, that legalized segregation. So Plessy versus Ferguson, the debut projected movies happened 3 weeks apart. So, as historian Robert C. Allen has noted, for nearly 70 years then, the history of moviegoing and the history of racial segregation in the US are not only coterminous but conjoined. Consider this image, for example. Here, 2 women, one black and one white, walk in opposite directions past the entrance of Avon Theater on Broughton Street in downtown Savannah in early 1949. Like many movie theaters, this entrance looks like an invitation. A conveniently located box office, bright neon lights, posters and production stills, and an overhanging marquee. The invitation, however, was extended to only one of these women. The white woman could freely enter the Avon or any of the other 5 theaters that resided just on this street block alone in 1949. The black woman could only walk past the Avon and these other 5 cinemas, or walk a mile east or west to attend an African American theater. As was common practice, movie theater owners often outright denied access to black patrons, and at best offered subpar accommodations which involved separate entrances, segregated balcony seating, or alternate showtimes. In many cities, however, there was frequently a third option: African American movie theaters built to serve black audiences. Already by 1909, there were 112 African American theaters, and that number would expand to roughly 1,000 by the 1950s. In 1925, just over 200 of these theaters were black owned and operated. By 1942, only 7 in the entire country had black proprietors. Nevertheless, these theaters performed an essential function. In the words of one African American journalist, they provided a space for those who, quote, refused to accept the accommodation of the peanut gallery, and where our people can attend without becoming conscious of the fact that their presence is undesirable. But we must remember that the movie theater itself had to be invented. So the first movies came out in 1894. And from 1894 to 1905, movies had no permanent home. You'd encounter them in a variety of locales, from the highbrow, in between acts at a playhouse, for example, to the increasingly lowbrow, like vaudeville theaters, amusement parks, what were called peep shows. Between 1905 and about 1913, 1914, however, we get the Nickelodeon boom, the era in which the popularity of semi-permanent storefront nickel theaters proved the movies were here to stay. And by the 1910s, we get the construction of purpose-built movie theaters, often called movie palaces. And these purpose-built theaters become common, and they're built all the way up until about 1950. So I included some local examples here. In the earliest period, watching movies was almost like a pop-up experience. So this was a drugstore. It was called Wheeler's Drugstore at 118 Bull Street, and there was a pop-up movie experience there that just lasted about 2 weeks. And then in the Nickelodeon era, there was a Nickelodeon theater called the Superba at 143 Bull. Today, it is behind Collins Quarter. I think it's called Doki Doki. It's an ice cream place. That was a movie theater. So Nickelodeons were not built to be theaters. They were converted store theaters. And then, of course, we know places like the Lucas, purpose-built permanent theaters. But where did early black audiences watch movies in Savannah? By the early 1900s, in Savannah, you'd find movies as special programs at the Savannah Theater, or interspersed with vaudeville at the local casino or music hall, all of which were either white-only establishments or had segregated seating. Savannah's weekly African-American newspaper, the Savannah Tribune, advised its readers in 1907, several moving picture places have dotted the city, and each one of them have a Jim Crow department. stay away from these places. Instead, the story of Black moviegoing in Savannah begins at local churches. Places of worship provided the only option for non-segregated seating until 1909, and the first documented local church screenings happened in July 1901. St. Philip AME was the most popular spot, and this church regularly brought traveling exhibitors to town to screen movies. So someone would arrive in town with a projector, set up for one night at a church, and then go to another church the next night. Other churches like Bethlehem Baptist bought a projector, and their minister ran the picture shows himself. Churches remained the primary venue for Black audiences until the opening of the Pekin Theater. The theater's opening responded to an urgent need. Over 51% of Savannah's population was African American, but there was nowhere to view a movie or live performance that wasn't segregated. The Pekin was built, owned, and operated by Josephine Stiles with the assistance of her son, W.J., as manager. And it's only appropriate that the woman who would own and operate Savannah, Georgia's first Black theater and bring regular movie screenings to over half the town's population would herself live a life cinematic in its scope. While the historical records of Stiles' life remain mysterious and often conflicting, what we can know is remarkable. Whether or not she was born enslaved proves unclear. There's conflicting records. But she was born to a Black mother and most likely a white father who was a member of the prominent Stiles family, who were owners of the Vale Royal rice plantation. By her lifetime, by Josephine's lifetime, the family had lost much of its wealth and had sold the plantation, which was eventually parceled into individual lots. And when Stiles, in 1887, put $80 down to purchase her first piece of real estate, she bought one of those plots, a powerful gesture of reclamation. So this is roughly the location of the original plantation home, and her first house and businesses were those two properties, the two properties there at the bottom in red. Whenever she looked out her home's front window or opened the door of her confectionery shop to welcome customers, she could see the very site of the former plantation's home in which resided the family that enslaved her ancestors. Building on the success of her first confectionery business, she soon expanded to a full grocery store, and over the next 20 years increased her property holdings substantially, becoming not merely one of the most financially successful Black Savannahans, but among the top 1% of wealthiest Black Georgians. She owned, operated, or funded various businesses for 53 years, enterprises that nourished and entertained. If you bought sweets or fruits and vegetables, enjoyed an ice cream cone or cigar, took a pleasure cruise, or spent a pleasurable afternoon at the amusement park, watched a baseball game or a boxing match, got chills from listening to Bessie Smith, or thrills from watching the movies of Helen Holmes, Stiles created opportunities and spaces for leisure, and in turn, enriched Savannah's social and cultural life. To open the Pekin, Stiles converted a pre-existing space on West Broad Street into a theater that held around 300 people. Given the limited and unjust theater-going options for Black Savannahans, locals flocked to the Pekin. One article noted that its architecture takes it out of the cheap variety and praised its elaborate exterior and interior finish. This is the only known photograph of this theater. As you can see, it's not the best quality. And it was never published in Savannah. This is actually from an Indianapolis newspaper, published in 1911. So this is the only known photograph, printed in Indianapolis in 1911, and its quality obviously does not reveal too much detail, but this is the original converted store theater. Later we'll see, she'll build a new theater. There was, eventually a few years later, a neighboring theater next door, the Globe Theater, and so this picture with better quality gives us a sense of what the Pekin probably looked like. As you can tell by this point in time, it was no longer the Globe Theater, but the Vines Royal Theater Hall. Since the original Pekin was not built as a theater, but converted to one, the theater's architecture could not completely withstand the business's success. Inside and out, overcrowding caused problems. But not until the popularity of movie screenings proved profitable will funds be available to expand the Pekin Theater. First, there was no lobby, which snowballed into issues related to crowd control. So in many ways, this is a good problem to have. Your place is so popular, it's crowded all the time. but because of the time period, as we'll see, this will be an issue. An ominous incident in December 1910 confirmed the theater's popularity and the potential pitfall of that success. On Monday night, the crowd was sizable but peaceful as patrons made their way out or in. From the perspective of two mounted police officers patrolling West Broad, however, this horde appeared threatening, and the policemen rode their horses violently into the crowd, quote, pushing people from one side to the other and all but striking them with their clubs. This event may seem isolated, but its impact was not. The theater's success was predicated not simply on its shows, but on it being a refuge from the outside world. With incidents like this one, the theater risked becoming just like the rest of the Jim Crow city. While race relations in Savannah had the reputation of being relatively peaceful compared to other major southern towns, the Savannah Tribune regularly mentioned stories of assaults upon individuals and attacks on black assembly. Not surprisingly, a new city ordinance against loafing and loitering appeared in 1911, and it was remarkably broad. Quote, it shall be unlawful for any person or persons to stand around or assemble on any of the sidewalks and loaf, loiter, or idle, or engage in any boisterous conduct or noise to the disturbance of others. This ordinance practically sounds as if written in response to incidents like the one at the Pekin. But Josephine Stiles had some ideas, applying quick fixes to the existing structure. She added a gallery which increased seating capacity by 100, and the front received an upgrade as well with electric lights. Reserved and box seats were added too, which enabled not only tiered pricing at higher rates, but also separation by class, which was a frequent request of middle-class patrons. Just over 2 years after the Pekin opened, the movie's popularity soared, and over the course of 1912, it started to become primarily a movie theater. Within 1 month, for example, their ads made the following transition: from the house of high-class pictures and vaudeville to the house of feature films. Vaudeville remained, but repeatedly written accounts attributed the theater's popularity, success, and record-breaking attendance to its film programming. In July, a grateful Josephine Stiles attached a personal letter to the theater's weekly advertisement. Quote, I was the first to give you a decent place of amusement. It has paid me and I will continue to give you the biggest and best show in town. The pictures are hand-colored. The performers, the patrons, and the proprietor are so by nature. Glad of it, aren't you? It was soon evident that the 1911 editions Stiles made were no longer enough to support the increased attendance. And she also had a new problem. As soon as she is successful, 2 new theaters opened directly across the street to compete with her. So, the opening of the Airdome Theater, the Victoria, in March 1911, provided the Pekin with its first serious competitor. The Victoria was an open-air movie theater with a purported, and exaggerated, I would say, seating capacity of 3,000. Whereas her theater sat 300. And the Airdome quickly established itself as a rival. By July 1911, however, it was under new ownership and was renamed the Baker Airdome. It was operated by a man named Mr. Baker of the Baker Amusement Company of Jacksonville, Florida. And I do know he was a white businessman. He ran the venue for just over 2 years, and during that period advertised bombastically, clearly intending to undercut the Pekin. So for example, tickets to the Airdome were half the price. So it's across the street, you pay 10 cents, but to go to the Pekin, you have to pay 20 cents. So he's just trying to compete with her in all ways. But she's gonna get the last word, don't worry. By the end of September 1913, the Airdome closed unexpectedly, and it remained closed until Josephine Stiles took over the lease in April 1915 and reopened it as a second movie theater. And then a few months later, she made a switch. She turned it from a movie theater to a boxing venue, and it stayed open until May of 1918. So in retrospect, the Airdome flamed out quickly, yet 6 months before its demise, an even greater threat opened another block away, and that was the Star Theater. The Star was the newest theater of Abe Guggenheimer, who in 1911 had previously opened a theater on Broughton Street called the Arcadia. Guggenheimer and Stiles were old grocery store rivals, and he had the same retail background as she did. Construction on the Star began in late 1912, and the theater was opened by March 1913. The Star bested the Pekin in size. It had 1,200 seats, Plus it boasted a bold exterior adorned with a gigantic electric star and a lavish interior, complete with stage curtain paintings of Abraham Lincoln and Ulysses S. Grant. The Star advertised itself as not only the grandest theater, quote, catering exclusively to the patronage of the colored people in Savannah, but one of the largest and handsomest in the entire United States, end quote. While the improvement Stiles made in 1911 helped the Pekin stand out against the alley air dome, the Star made the Pekin look like what it was, which was a converted storefront theater. And here's where we encounter Stiles' inventiveness. Like many other theater proprietors across the nation at the exact same time, she recognized that as the number of theaters proliferated, prices and programming were comparable, and as standards were getting progressively higher, it's the theater itself that would make the difference. It's no surprise then that the Pekin announced its expansion shortly after the Star was under construction. Stiles would not merely build a theater that would outdo the Star. In short time, she would construct Savannah's in one of the country's first theater palaces. According to scholar Maria Slowinska, a theater becomes a palace when it did not just provide a pleasant context for watching a film, but the theater itself formed a significant experience in its own right through its beauty, amenities, and buildings that were, in historian Douglas Gomery's words, attractions unto themselves. For Stiles to accomplish such a feat as early as 1913 thus extended her local importance to a national scale. Yet even if the Pekin had closed around this time and never entered its next era, Stiles would have already achieved something significant. She built a culture of theater going for Black Savannahans and prompted the blossoming of West Broad itself. The renovation and expansion of the Pekin began by July 1913, after months of rumors and lasted until December. The Pekin's architecture changed in 3 ways to fit the popularity of movies and to challenge her nearby competitors. First, several changes enhanced safety and comfort. The exterior construction was quite ingenious if the goal was to provide a safe place for its patrons. Stiles owned 2 adjoining lots fronting on West Broad. In fact, if you look at where West Broad is, everything on the street in yellow, she owned all of those businesses, and she owned the land itself. So she owned those lots. She could have expanded down the street. So you can imagine her building the theater down West Broad, and you'll notice she built it behind the original theater. While the front of the original theater received an upgrade, it remained the only part of the theater visible from the street. The new theater extended behind the original one and between 2 rows of 1-story houses, so it would slightly rise above the houses to enable light and ventilation. Perhaps the most surprising development was that the entirety of the original theater was going to be made into a lobby. So what's outlined in green, that's the original 300-seat theater, and then you see the new theater being built behind it. And this lobby will include a confectionery shop, going back to her first business, and a cigar stand. With the classy new front, the kind of hidden theater tucked in between rows of houses, doubled seating capacity, and a lobby to handle crowds, because there's the city ordinances passed and you can no longer be out on the sidewalk. Stiles ensured a space that presented an inviting front to the public and more secure, agreeable accommodations to its patrons. Second, the interior conformed precisely to our idea of movie palace opulence, even if on a much smaller scale. The interior was done in bold colors, a white metal ceiling, deep red wainscoting, and mission green woodwork. There was not only seating for approximately 800 people, but it was tiered to provide separation by both class and age. There were 8 boxes, each with 8 seats, which were elaborately furnished and draped with beautiful velvet curtains. And in addition to a balcony, there was a separate part of the balcony reserved for children who will, quote, therefore not be in a position to annoy adults. There was an unobstructed view from any seat in the house, and a cool view too. Windows and a system of 12 fans would guarantee patrons comfort in warmer months, and steam heating was used in winter. With these first 2 changes alone to the exterior and interior, the movie-fueled investment initially paid off. The third architectural change offered something beyond comfort and luxury, two qualities that ensured patrons enjoyed whatever pictures and shows were playing in a welcoming environment. The lobby renovation did something else, a characteristic of what will soon become known as a movie palace. It turned the building itself into a destination, a place where patrons might visit regardless of what played on stage or screen. Stiles converted the original theater's main floor into this lobby/arcade. This elegantly furnished addition featured a combination ice cream parlor and confectionery shop and cigar stand, and the original gallery space turned into a seating area. The parlor was clearly one of the most anticipated elements of the new Pekin. When the parlor finally opened, the Tribune printed the most detailed article ever written about the theater. No photograph appeared, but the level of detail was photographic. This is the company that made the fountain. This is their name. This is what their fountains look like, but this is obviously not the actual Pekin fountain, but it resembled this. Everything you see on the screen here cost $4,000. So this is how this new lobby area was described. All of its amenities, which is nearly $120,000 today. Just weeks after the parlor opened, it was singled out in a speech at the Negro Business League, which praised Stiles for having, quote, the imagination to conceive the possibilities of such a business in connection with the theater, and secondly, the courage to institute it. There were other ice cream shops nearby, the speaker noted. But Josephine Stiles' novel idea was to apply a retail mindset drawn from her decades of experience to an entertainment enterprise. One of the key architects of the Movie Palace described the building as a type where the show begins on the sidewalk. But what happens when the show can't begin on the sidewalk because it's a racially fraught public space? Stiles' new Pekin with its commodious lobby offered an elegant and innovative solution to this challenge. And inside, beyond its material appointments, the Pekin possessed symbolic worth. Stiles created a space where, to borrow a phrase from one of its ads, one's presence was desirable, a moral value that mattered far beyond a given picture or show. With these three alterations and additions to the original theater, Josephine Stiles had created not merely a thriving business, but a fully enclosed entertainment destination that served half of Savannah's population with welcoming, luxurious accommodations the other half of Savannah's population denied them. So what happened to this theater? It was successful enough to stay open and expand, and Stiles' willingness to take on debt to do so indicated her sense of ambition for the theater's potential. From her humble beginnings with her first piece of property in 1887, she acquired a large amount of real estate over the next quarter century, culminating in her purchase of the 2 lots that included the Pekin Theater. Around the time that she initially opened the Pekin, she began to take out debt deeds. These are some of them on screen. In other words, she borrowed against the value of her property and ideally repaid the debt within a given time before the property deed transferred to the person that lent her the money. And from the available data, it's clear that between 1909 and 1929, she leveraged her property holdings to fund the Pekin Theater, drawing upon a stockpile of properties whose cash value she could make liquid. Such debts do not signal that the Pekin was a failed enterprise, but they indicate the lack of financing options available to African American, particularly African American women in this era. For most of her life, 100% of her wealth was real estate and not personal property or investments. One by one, she had to sell, she either sold or lost pieces of real estate to keep the Pekin going. And the property she held onto the longest was the first piece of property she bought in 1887, Lot 17 of North Boulevard Ward. That piece of real estate she bought on the former style plantation grounds. She eventually lost every single piece of property she owned for the sake of this theater. And from these cold numbers, I suggest we can detect the strength of her feelings about this theater and its value to the community. Debts, however, weren't Stiles' only problems. The theater peaked in the middle to late 19-teens, and while movies fueled its success, fiery flames sparked its gradual decline. After a projection booth fire in 1918, which was a common occurrence in theaters in this time period, it appears that movies were rarely shown at the Pekin again. And after another decade of occasional closures, frequent management changes, and the sudden death of her only child and business partner, W.J., in 1927, Stiles sold the property to Standard Oil. In July 1929, just 4 months shy of the Pekin's 20th anniversary, a short notice dropped at the bottom of page 4 of the newspaper. Peking gives way to gas station. A landmark in the local amusement world, the column reads, passed into history this week. Stiles spent part of the 1920s outside of Savannah, operating theaters in Jacksonville, Brunswick, Athens, and Albany, but returned by 1930 and opened her final business. She went back to her roots, operating a grocery store and confectionery shop in Savannah's Yamacraw district, until the entire area was condemned and demolished to build a housing project in 1940. She passed away in December of 1940 and was memorialized, this is from her obituary, quote, as being, quote, at one time Savannah's most active Negro businesswoman who was once well known in the amusement field. Already in 1940, Stiles and her achievements were written about as if a distant memory. The Pekin had provided the proof of concept that a theater could prosper in this section of West Broad that had previously been more residential than commercial, and its success had led not only to more theaters, the Air Dome, the Star, the Globe, the Dunbar, but to the prosperity of other businesses too, because theaters generated commerce. They brought people to the city. West Broad was not merely a hub for Black Savannah, but also for outlying rural Black communities. Theaters concentrated foot traffic in a specific area, kept patrons there for hours, and thus prompted them to seek options for dining, drinks, shopping, etc. In this way, Stiles' success helped to make West Broad itself a destination. Consider one small example. When Dave's Soda Shop opened in October 1946, it advertised itself in the local paper as located on the magic corner of West Broad and Gaston in the heart of the theater district. Although it opened years after Stiles' death, and it's obviously not a theater, it marketed its proximity as being part of its proximity to the theater district, a seed that Josephine Stiles had planted. Stiles' achievements were not limited to her own business, but influenced others as well. We can observe her impact most distinctly in the exhibition exploits of Walter S. Scott. Scott had many advantages that Stiles lacked. He was the son of a businessman. He earned a top-notch education. He founded 2 banks and became president of one of them. He started the Guarantee Life Insurance Company, where he worked as president until his death in 1961. In addition to his vast real estate holdings and storied business career, he was widely recognized as a civic leader, a philanthropist, and an activist. By the 1920s, the genius of Scott had conquered practically every professional field except entertainment. And when he decided to build his Dunbar Theater, Scott could look to Stiles as an example. And it's clear from his signature venue that he did. When it opened in February 1921, the Dunbar followed the Pekin's footsteps by emphasizing not simply quality programming, but the beauty and amenities of the venue itself. It had seating for 700, featured a beautifully decorated interior with rose-tinted walls and atmospheric lighting. It had a large and attractive lobby that afforded the waiting crowds ample comfort between shows. And those shows would eventually feature a house band for additional entertainment. The theater was incorporated into a 4-story office complex that housed numerous businesses over the years. And in the earliest days of the theater, one of those doors was an ice cream parlor, precisely what Stiles had installed previously in the Pekin's lobby. Practically every move that Walter Scott made in the film exhibition business, Josephine Stiles made first. She blazed the trail that made everything he did easier to accomplish. Stiles was a pioneer, and her only precedent was herself. She operated in the exhibition business just as it was starting, and did so in an era commonly known as the nadir of race relations. While Scott's forays into the exhibition world were modeled off the Pekin, he managed to avoid many of the challenges she faced. For one, he started on much more solid financial footing. Whereas Stiles ran her theater as a family business and had to draw upon her personal wealth whenever she ran into financial trouble, Scott incorporated his business as the Savannah Motion Picture Corporation. So he had access to credit, and solicited public funding, even selling stock to build his first theater. In addition, like Stiles, Scott took on his competition. The Dunbar was built to be a movie theater, although there were live shows there. So its main competition was not the Pekin, who no longer showed movies by this point and was open and frequently in the 1920s, his main competition was the Star. For Stiles, competitive challenge resulted in constructing a new theater and turning it into a palace. For Scott, the battle was rhetorical, and the message that Scott put out there was clear: support Black-owned businesses. Scott pursued a strategy to combat competition by marketing the theater from the beginning as, quote, the only movie theater owned by Negroes in Savannah. For Scott, his ownership was not merely a source of pride, but a savvy marketing tool to distinguish his business from its primary competitor. And early ads landed on a concise motto that you see at the bottom there. Negro ownership, Negro management, Negro patronage. In one of the earliest ads for the Dunbar, I didn't include this, that motto, Scott took out an ad in the Savannah Tribune and included that motto 14 times on one page of the newspaper. So this is very important to him. While the Star had been successful and even celebrated for what it had added to West Broad Street, locals responded uneasily to its white ownership. But eventually Scott will ease those qualms. Just as Stiles took over one of her competitors, the Air Dome, Scott will purchase the Star Theater in January of 1924, thus giving control of the moving picture business in Savannah to African Americans. For just over a dozen years, from 1924 to 1937, all of West Broad's theaters were Black-owned businesses. The Pekin, of course, eventually closed, and the Dunbar and the Star will go the way of most African American theaters in the nation during and after the Great Depression. They'll be bought out by white theater chains, not just changing ownership, but removing local control as well. This time period might now seem short-lived, but at the time it was an important feat, not just financially, but symbolically. Stiles, Scott, and other African-American entrepreneurs reclaimed space in a city designed to regulate, segregate, and exclude them in every conceivable way, and the theaters marketed that fact proudly to patrons. To attend Scott's Dunbar and Star, West Broad's denizens were not just going to the movies, but participating in something larger. This is a quote that you see here. In patronizing these houses, colored people are keeping for themselves two of the best playhouses found anywhere. At a time where African Americans had to keep out or keep away, keep to or keep off, as they navigated the southern cityscape, the value of this change, keep for, should not be underestimated. The Pekin, Star, and Dunbar mattered to Black Savannahans because they served an audience excluded elsewhere in this town, but their significance extended beyond the city because their programming demonstrated an early commitment to Black cinema, and in particular, a type of film called race movies, which were Black cast films produced independently for segregated African American audience. And here's some examples on screen. To book such films meant more than just adding another movie to your schedule. This act provided institutional support to the burgeoning African American film industry and corresponding star system. Early Black cinema depended on just a handful of theaters who would enable those movies to find an audience and generate the ticket sales needed to further fund new ones. And both Walter Scott and Josephine Stiles repeatedly booked African American films. Scott made a point to open the Dunbar with a film directed by Oscar Michaud, the prolific African American independent filmmaker. Scott selected Michaud's The Symbol of the Unconquered as the venue's opening night movie. And then just weeks later, he announced the screening of African American films would be a priority for his theater. Once again, however, Scott's policy followed in the path of Stiles. We often find short films by Black filmmakers screening at the Pekin. Around this time, African Americans began to form production companies to produce fictional films, such as the Chicago-based Foster Photoplay Company. Notably, Stiles booked short films produced and directed by William D. Foster, who was the first African American producer to make short films specifically for Black audiences. And when Foster's films played the Pekin, something special arrived with the reels of film. Foster himself, and the star of those films, you see pictured here, Lottie Grady. Grady not only traveled with Foster in his short films from theater to theater throughout the South, but she performed between movie screenings on stage. In retrospect, this Pekin event obtains almost mythical status. a lost snapshot of an alternative 20th century cinema history that could have been. The first black director, William Foster, one of the earliest black film stars, Lottie Grady, bringing their movies directly to black audiences at a black-owned, operated, and managed movie palace in 1914. The Pekin admonished its audience, don't miss this chance. Come out and see what colored people can do. This wording captures the sense of possibility at this moment, the chance for a true counter-cinema culture to develop. Black audiences watching movies where black characters and life are centered, not marginalized, gazing at black stars who lacked for neither talent or glamour, and encountering these movies and their stars in theaters that courted and welcomed them. But none of these industries, film exhibition, filmmaking, or stardom, would ultimately thrive in a way that this particular moment anticipated in 1914, does not diminish what's accomplished here. Josephine Stiles had created something when there was nothing, and even if she never conceived of her ambition beyond running a business and making a living in an up-and-coming industry, her Pekin proved a vital local institution. I want to conclude by thinking about this image. When a writer from a national film industry publication called Moving Picture World visited Savannah in April of 1917, he gathered every theater owner, operator, and manager in Savannah for a meeting and a publicity photograph, which is what you see here. Yet, as one surveys this group gathered around a banquet table at a local hotel, you will notice a conspicuous absence, Josephine Stiles. While we can only imagine her seated here, as she should have been, I've tried through my research to provide Stiles a metaphorical seat at the table and write her accomplishments properly into local Savannah history and into American film history at large. Her achievements are meaningful, not marginal, to both of these histories. When no local theaters properly accommodated black patrons, she welcomed them. When 99.7% of America's 22,000 movie theaters would not show films by early black filmmakers, she screened their movies and supported their work. And when no roadmap existed for a black woman to build and sustain an entertainment enterprise, and her peers nationwide, most likely numbered in the single digits, she crafted the blueprint that inspired others and helped foster decades of culture along West Broad. As we return to the 1962 film footage that began this presentation, we can reflect on what we see here versus what we see today over 6 decades later on Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. About 5 years separate the images. This is 62, I think that's around 1967. In a 1994 interview, activist, historian, and preservationist Wesley Wallace Law commented, quote, "Damage has been done that's irreplaceable. It's getting to the point that churches are all that's left of early black history. We'll have nothing left to show that we were industrious, respectful people." And over 30 years later, his observation rings even truer. And as the historian David Glassberg remarks, it is difficult to value what cannot be seen. I hope, however, that the next time you walk or drive down historic West Broad, you'll now be able to see what's no longer there, to traverse this corridor with a new perspective, and to remember the ambition and the innovation of Josephine Stiles. Thank you.
Do you have any questions, Chad? Oh, okay. Yeah.
This is a more general question, but with regard to the early silent movies, a lot of them are like 10 or 15 minutes, and I wondered how were they shown in movie theaters? I can't imagine somebody had been in a theater to watch a 10 or 15 minute movie. So did they show several at a time?
Yes. Oh, actually, I'll show you something.
In other words, if you attended a movie during the silent era, would you typically watch several of those short movies? Or
Yes.
more?
So the very first movies were 20 seconds. But eventually they would string together a series of short films. So for example, one of the early 1900s movies would start being about 10 minutes in length. But a lot of times they would assemble programs of 1 hour. So you might watch, they would assemble a series of short films for an
You
hour.
watch several.
Right, and so this is the first ad for the Pekin. So you can see it's a bunch of live performance, and then it's 2,000 feet of flickerless motion pictures. And that was about 20 minutes, 2,000 feet. So that would have just been, at some theaters, movies would have just been one part of this overall program of not just film, but live entertainment. Yes?
I have a quick question. One, I would like to say thank you, because I'm not from Savannah, so the history is always nice to know a little bit about where you live. I had never heard of Josephine Stiles, and so the question that I have for you is, you said that you've been doing research for several years now. How did you actually come upon her?
So back in 6 years ago, when I started all of this, my first research question is, what movie theaters were in Savannah, where are they located? And so I was just kind of trying to, as I would encounter names, write them down. There's an online database that had some of this, but it wasn't always correct or was incomplete. And never included the Pekin Theater either, because movies were on and off part of its programming, so some people didn't officially count it as a movie theater. So I was doing research, and I began to narrow in on West Broad, and I was reading through old issues of the Savannah Tribune, and I knew the name Pekin Theater, and then I can remember the moment where I was reading through this really old newspaper, and it talked about the proprietor, like Miss J.E. Stiles. And I was like, that was the light bulb moment. And then in a couple of interesting and incredibly valuable local history books by Charles Elmore and Charles Hoskins, there's brief bits about her as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then once I learned about her and began doing research at municipal archives and other digital resources and places like that, it just like kept going on and on, because there's so much about her life remains very much a mystery. Because as you noticed, there's no public photographs. The theater was never photographed locally. She was actually rarely written about in the newspaper. What you've seen here is kind of all of it, compared to other, especially like men who were entrepreneurs in that time period. So there's still a lot to learn.
Ingenuity was really something.
Yeah, because this is the beginning of film history, so there's no, it's not like she can look at someone else and say, I mean, how did you do that? It just had to be a learn as you go experience.
The theater that's on East Broad, is that at all a competitor? Is the height or date range of that was popular totally different, or?
Yes, so the on East Broad is, both of the buildings are still there. There's the Melody Theater, which is now a church, and then there's the East Side Theater, which I don't 100% know what's going on with right now.
Yeah.
But those both opened a couple of months apart in 1946.
Okay.
So that's going to be a much later generation. But those were open at the same time as the Star and Dunbar. It's just the Pekin that closed really early. Yeah, cool. Yes.
In regards to what the gentleman asked about the sharpness of the movies, when I was a child, we went to the Star Theater, and it only cost 10 cents to get in. And you saw 2 movies, and we stayed all day because our parents were shopping on Bay Street. And the kids had been there all day, and they'd be telling us what was going to happen next because they'd been sitting there all day too.
Yeah.
But it was a nice experience.
Yes, what you got for your money at a movie theater back then was incredible, because you're right, it had the continuous admission policy where once you bought a ticket, you were in. And for a lot of places had like bottle cap admissions and things like that. And so it was, that will all go away in this later, because this is kind of the golden age of people going to the theaters, and once TV comes along, you start getting less and less for your money at movie theaters, and the concession prices go up because of that. So unfortunately, those kind of policies, you get kicked out after the one movie you buy a ticket for a day.
We stayed all day.
Yeah.
Do you know what the meaning of Pekin Why did you pick that?
Yes, so the first African-American theater in the US was Chicago's Pekin Theater. And it's, I believe Robert Motz was the owner, and it opened 1905-ish, 1905, 1906, I'd have to check that. And so it also had, like a lot of theaters they tried to have a name that was exotic. So that's why you get theaters called like the Ritz or the Roxy. It's trying to make it like seem exotic or interesting to attend. And so there were a lot of Pekin theaters across the U.S. because they were kind of paying tribute to the first African American theater. And just like the Dunbar was named after Paul Laurence Dunbar, the African American poet. So kind of finding ways to kind of honor those histories through the naming of the theaters was a thing that was done.
But I don't guess you ever found anything that would tell you how she found out about the Peking in Chicago.
No, it was, well...
Was it written about in the Tribune?
I'd have to double check that. And I don't remember the exact year the Chicago Defender started. I don't know if it was that early. But there was a national, even if it wasn't the Defender, a national African-American press. And so she would have learned about it that way. Yeah. And I have one news notice about, I know she went to Chicago at some point, because it was like announced in the paper as a social event, like Ms. Stiles travels to Chicago. So I know she had been there.
It wasn't the founder of the Chicago Defender from Brunswick?
Savannah.
Yeah,
Savannah,
yeah,
he was
Robert
from
C.
Savannah.
Stack Abbott, yeah.
Yeah.
So a Savannah connection there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a comment, and a lot of you probably know this, but the University of Georgia Library Special Collections has a dedicated program of collecting all the films of Georgia that can be found, whether they're old movies that were shot in Georgia, home movies, individuals that have home movies, or news reels, anything like that. So it provides a means for preserving old films.
Yeah, that's where this footage came from. It's tiny at the bottom, but they're Brown Media Archives. This is from, it's been digitized by UGA, yeah.
You had a question?
Oh,
Yes.
I signed up because of the Dunbar Theater. My mother spoke highly about the Dunbar Theater as well as the Star Theater, so I wanted to actually visually see what it looked like back then, so now we can have this conversation. I have it in sight of mine, so I'm looking forward to having that discussion with her. She's 88.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And if we, Sean mentioned our walking tour, you'll see more images there, and we'll visit some of these sites as well. And the star, you saw a really early image of the star, you can tell it looks like something from the 19-teens, and it will evolve over time and start looking more like a traditional movie theater. The Star was the longest continually operated movie theater in Savannah's history, in terms of showing movies continuously.
Well, and that gives me a good segue into, because we're kind of coming up on our hour, people need to slip out, but if like your mother would be interested in sitting to do an oral history to talk about the Dunbar and her experiences, that would be a lovely thing. We would love to connect with her or anybody else that's interested in doing an oral history to talk about the movie-going and theater experience in Savannah. Connect with us in the archives, and I know Chad would really love to get that information too as part of his research as he continues on this path of documenting theater history in Savannah. But I want to thank Chad for sharing this research and history with us. It's been really great. So let's give him another round of applause. If you haven't already, please do your prompt cards. I'm really excited to kind of see what you guys all kind of walk away with that. And also, if you want to do history on the go, we would love to get some of you guys kind of talking and answering some of those questions as well. Kelly and Kelly are going to help us out with that. But if you have any other questions for Chad, I know he's happy to answer those. But people that need to slip out and go back to work, feel free to.
When is your book coming out next year?
Oh, it's finished. It's in